The worst of it all is I remember I was out in public. I had found him. He told me to go one way out to where he was supposed to meet me, and I had my suspicions on things. And I went past where I thought he was, and my suspicions were correct in what his choices were to be with other women. And I walked in and I wanted to speak with him about it. And he immediately started beating me up. And we made it outside of the place of where his mistress was, her place of work. And I had been down on the ground, and then I had been brought back up, pulled by my hair, and then strangled. And my feet were dangling from the ground. And there was a grace that came over me. And I looked around, and there were all kinds of people watching, and nobody did anything.
Hi again, everyone. It's Pastor Tom of the 24 Today podcast. I so appreciate you being here with me again with my special guest, Johanne Brennan. And this means a lot to me just because it helps me to be able to grow as a person and to learn more so that I can share with others just the things that I'm learning. And today, I know that there will be many of you through this discussion that I'm having with Johanne, which is not going to be an easy discussion for us to have, but I know that many of you will personally relate to this, or you will know someone that that could use this information. So I would appreciate it if at some point you will like this, thumbs up, comment on it, share it, subscribe to the channel. Check out Johanne's website that I'll be mentioning to you as well. And all of that is going to help get this message out to more and more people. So for this particular podcast, I'm going to talk about something that happens much more often than you might think. In fact, it happens nearly 5 million to 5 million women annually in the United States alone. Now that's one every 9 seconds. What I'm talking about is domestic violence. It's my honor to have with me today author, speaker, consultant, women's advocate Johanne Brennan. Johanne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Pastor Tom. It is an honor to be here and be able to share about the war that is going on behind closed doors.
Sure. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Johanne. What do you do for a living? Tell me maybe something about your family.
Absolutely. So I am an author of the book, How
Yep,
to
there's
Thaw
your
Your
book.
Frozen Feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I speak on the subject, and I do that full time. Um, my book was released December 10th, but prior to that, I was working on writing it. Um, I have a beautiful family. I have two children, ages 15 and 20.
Mm.
And I am very happy to say that I am in a loving, respectful, honest relationship with somebody new that is became involved in my life initially as a friend, and we have a beautiful family together.
I'm happy for you, Johanne, that you're to this point in your life. We're going to talk about a really, really serious issue, but just to start it off in a light way, let me ask you what your favorite TV show was growing up in Canada.
It was Sesame Street.
Ah, Sesame Street. Okay,
I loved
good.
it as a
Okay.
young girl. Hmm.
Well, Mine was the Flintstones, so you can kind of see like your Sesame Street, you're learning and all that stuff, and I'm like Fred and Barney, hitting one another over the head with a club and so forth.
Yeah.
Johanne, you have written a book, as you held up just a moment ago. You've written a book entitled "How to Thaw Your Frozen Feet." Can you tell me a little bit about that title and what that means to you?
Absolutely. So, statistically speaking, a woman goes back to an abusive partner up to 7 times. I I went back three.
Okay.
I was um, I was married into a crime family in the Caribbean, and the title
Joanne,
of my
did you say
yes,
Crown family?
a crime family.
Crime, I'm sorry. Crime family. Okay. Okay.
Yes, a crime family.
Okay.
They were quite notorious,
Okay.
and the title of my book was based on what I had been through, the power and the intrigue and the control and the all facets of abuse. And going back to those statistics of a woman going back average woman going back 7 times, I realized that I had to thaw my feet because when you're in an abusive relationship, you feel stuck, you feel frozen, and you're really not sure how or what to do. Given the fact that I was a minority in the country, it was I was alone because of the power that the family had with their relations of the government, the police force that was quite corrupt, and the National Defense Force. I was very much alone, and I had to figure out a way if I wanted to survive and make it back to my country, Canada. I had to figure out on my own how to get out of what I was in, and I had to thaw my feet and make some very serious decisions about what was going on after I discerned and realized what I was in was not a healthy situation. And that is the reason for the title of my book.
How long into your marriage did this start to happen?
It started before I was married.
Okay.
So there were all kinds of red flags that indicated um, that there were control and manipulation and lies. But I was in denial. I
Mm-hmm.
thought I could change the world as a young
Yes.
girl. I was
Mm-hmm.
married at 19,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, we met when I was 15. And there were many indicators, but I just wanted to push them aside because I thought, I can change him.
Sure. Sure. Um, did you come from an abusive family?
No, I did not. I came from a beautiful, loving family. I was adopted. So I was in foster care for the first 4 months of my life. And I have the most amazing family
Mm.
that adopted me, my mother and my father. And that is one of the only things that kept me going was when I was down and out and I was not understanding which way to turn or what to do. I would think about the foundation that I was brought up with as a little girl. And that is what kept me going when I didn't think I could go any further.
Um, as we're listening to this, somebody that has never been abused, the first question that comes up is, why do you go back? And I know that that's not an easy answer because there's a lot of it varies on every individual, but for those of us that haven't been abused, if we're in a burning house, we're going to run out of that house and not return. But it's not that simple. It's not that way. And so help us to understand why a woman would go back to an abusive situation?
Well, Pastor Tom, for myself, I know that at the tender age of 15, what I thought was love was not love. It wasn't true love. It was a um, it wasn't even it wasn't a relationship, because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my
Okay.
value
Mm-hmm.
uh, at that age. I didn't allow myself the opportunity to understand what I really wanted in life. And when somebody who has grown up in a corrupt situation, very powerful, wealthy family that is involved in this dysfunction that I didn't understand at first, um, their life is built on manipulation and lies and control and deceit. So um, for me, and they're very good at conning as well. And that's where the manipulation ties in. What I thought he was doing was showing me care and love and concern, but there was none of that. And I misconstrued that because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what boundaries I wanted for my life. I didn't know what my um, my boundaries, morals, and ethics were as a 15-year-old because I was
Sure.
still trying to figure out
Mm-hmm.
life. So I plunged in too fast. And when a woman is in the abusive cycle, there's the I love you and the flowers and the
Mm-hmm.
dinner
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. And there's no abuse has no discrimination. It happens to people in low income. It happens all
Mm-hmm.
the way up to the ultra elite. And I happen to be in with the very wealthy. And um, I would be controlled. I would be told what to do. It was as if he had an ownership of me. And I thought that's the way it's supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
when you are with a husband. But it's nothing, it's everything further from the truth
Sure.
because nobody owns you. Nobody has the right to think they own you and control and manipulate you, let alone um, expose you to all of the different facets of abuse. But again, because I didn't know myself and what my values were in my life because I was so young and putting myself at the bottom of the list because I thought, from a traditional aspect of being married, that this is what I was supposed to do and my husband was allowed to do this. And when you get married, you're married for life. But
Sure.
you're not married for life if you're in a very dysfunctional
Right.
situation. So why I went back 3 times versus the six, or why any woman tends to go back, is because of the abusive cycle. There's the nice stages of what you think is caring and concern, although it's a manipulation. It is everything's a process, and so once you go through that process, the hitting starts, or the raping starts again, or some form of other abuse, the financial control, and then you're back to the honeymoon phase again, where there's the apologies and the flowers and buying you something, and it's cyclical. And women go back because I know I went back because I was afraid. Even though I was being abused, I was being provided for materialistically.
Sure.
I had a roof over my head. I had
Sure.
um, clothing. I had
Mm-hmm.
money
Mm-hmm.
at my disposal that I could spend. But you have to um, realize that is not a healthy situation to be in. And I didn't realize that because of the cyclical process of how the abuse took place. Women go back because they think it's better for their children to have a father,
Right. Okay.
but it's not when you're in an unhealthy, dysfunctional
Sure.
situation like that. I didn't know how I was going to be able to provide.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is why I went back, because I was dependent instead of being independent. And when two people are what I realize now is when two people are in a relationship, healthy, loving, non-dysfunctional relationship, then you can be allowed to thrive as an independent individual, but in a good relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find that process out for myself through all of my healing. But women go back for so many reasons, and mainly for me, it was because I wanted to continue to be provided for. I was still conned into thinking he cared, because there's a whole slew of positives that you think you see, until you do a self analysis and realize that that is not actually what it is.
So he would apologize.
Oh, of course. He would apologize. I was raped by him. I was hit. I was strangled, cheated upon. um, Financial control, not in the way of restriction, but in the way of here's this, you have to spend it, you have to show what you spend it on, and you can't come back with cash in your hand. So that's a different type of abuse. There was countless times where I was pulled by my hair, kicked, punched, intimidated, in public and right in public and out of the home, in the home, sorry.
Now, without talking about the place it happened, or was it in a part of the world where that was more acceptable, or, I mean, not viewed on in the same way that would be Canada or the United States?
Absolutely. I think across the board in Canada and the United States, it's just a little bit more quiet. It is still a very taboo subject to discuss. Um, in the case of where I was, it was a very male dominated society. And husbands throughout, they have sweethearts or their mistresses all on the side, and it's widely accepted there, which I didn't realize in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's a very common thing.
I have I have only one experience of feeling fear physically, and I only mention it just to say, just to even start the discussion with you, because I don't mean in any way to say that I relate, because I don't relate to the physical fear that you went through. But when I was in junior high, a big kid, my first day of school, threatened me and threw me up against the locker, and I mean, he was big enough that my body literally was kind of like lifted off the ground, and I was thrown up against the locker. And so to this moment, I mean, even though that's back in junior high, I can remember that feeling, which in no way is at any level of what you've experienced. But what is the fear like for a woman who's, there's someone in her life that's bigger and stronger? I mean, what is that feeling like?
It's a very scary feeling. The worst of it all is I remember I was out in public. I had found him. He told me to go one way out to where he was supposed to meet me, and I had my suspicions on things. And I went past where I thought he was, and my suspicions were correct in what his choices were to be with other women. And I walked in and I wanted to speak with him about it, and he immediately started beating me up. And we made it outside of the place of where his mistress was, her place of work. And I had been down on the ground, and then I had been brought back up, pulled by my hair, and then strangled, and my feet were dangling from the ground. And there was a grace that came over me. And I looked around and there were all kinds of people watching and nobody did anything. And I couldn't understand why, because what was happening was on all levels, absolutely the worst possible situation. And during that grace or that calm or peace, even though I was in a very poor position where I thought I was going to die, I thought they're not helping because of who the family is. They're a very wealthy, powerful family. So nobody did anything for fear of themselves. And so when he dropped me to the ground, all I remembered is if I want to live, I have to get out. Nobody was helping me but myself at that point, unless there was the grace of God that happened to me when I had that moment of peace. I managed to get in my car. I called my parents back in Canada, and I said, I think I'm going to die and I need help. Please wire me a plane ticket. I went back to my home. I grabbed my passport and I made it to the airport. And I don't know how I made it through because of the power that that family had. Either the mother, who was she was the matriarch of the family, if you will. She either allowed me to pass through customs and through the airport, or I was one step ahead. And maybe it had something to do with that grace. I don't know to this day, but what I do know is that I made it. Now, it was very grueling. It was very difficult. I had 4 cracked ribs, and I have the body map from the hospital of where I went to upon my return in Canada, and I had 17 bruises and abrasions from top to bottom, including the cracked ribs. And I remember calling my mother in Washington, and I broke down. I think because the adrenaline had settled a little bit, and I called her collect. I had no money. I just had the clothes on my back and my passport. And I said, I can't do this, Mom. And she said, you have to do this. You need to get back home. And her talking with me for about half an hour gave me the strength once again to pick up and get on the plane and make it back to Ottawa. And then my father was at the airport waiting for me. But I went back 2 more times after that. And fear, I realized yes, there was a fear that I was going to die, absolutely, as well as all of the 17 major surgeries that I had within that abuse as well, 2 of which I almost died. And you have a choice, and it is a mindset. You have a choice whether or not you want to move on or to succumb to it. And I didn't want to, because I remember that little girl who was vivacious and full of life and love. And fear, it can be a very destroying thing. But I made the choice to move forward.
What was the final thing that you said, I'm not doing this anymore, and you left?
It was the day that I was raped by him in our home. But that wasn't the instance that made me make the decision. It was a few hours later when I was cooking, and he didn't like the way I cooked the food. And he took the pot of hot food and he threw it at me, and I was burned. And my 2-year-old son was in the bathtub, and I was trying not to cry. And he said, what happened, Mommy? Daddy angry? Daddy spank you? Daddy hurt you? And that was it. I still didn't have enough worth or value in myself, in my belief system for who I was, because I had been so belittled and so torn to pieces, layers of layers of layers, physically, mentally, financially, that it took my 2-year-old son saying that
Mm-hmm.
and my 5-year-old daughter bringing a box of tissue into the bathroom, wiping my face. And that was the last day.
Joanne, if a stranger hits a person, that's one thing. But if someone that you love and you've married hits you, that is a whole different level of emotion, which is part, I'm sure, of why it's hard to leave, because there was this love and this commitment, but so how does that component add into, I guess, the way it makes you feel as a person when someone who has supposedly committed their life to you, strikes you? What does that do to you as an individual?
What it did to me is I became a shell of who I was. There was nothing left. I wanted to commit suicide. I went through 2 major depressions. And the person that you thought loved you, um, that isn't love. And um, it destroyed me. Well, almost, because if I had succumbed to the suicidal tendencies, the depressions, the surgeries, I wouldn't be here today. So it brought me to a very deep, dark place in my life, and um, I can't say it any better than I was a shell of who I was, or who I thought I was. Um, and somebody that does do that to you, that is not a true, honest, pure love at
Mm-hmm.
all, in any way, shape, or form. And I can't say that I loved him. I thought what it was love, but that was not love to begin with. There was a care, of course, but looking back on it now, there was no foundation built at all to even remotely say that there was love. So it can destroy you. It
Mm-hmm.
can bring you to your knees.
And can I just say, as a minister, for those that are listening, that nobody should feel like they have to stay in a relationship like this where they're being abused. And if your feelings of what you see in the Bible or Scripture, I don't. If that's what makes you feel like you have to stay, I don't think you're looking at that right, because I don't believe that's in any way what God wants, and I don't believe that's the message of Jesus to us, that we would have to stay in a situation like that. So when you finally did escape, how did you start to put things back together again?
I called my family doctor, and I said I think I'm depressed, because I was crying all the time. The hypervigilance was terrible. I was getting about 2 hours of sleep a night. I had PTSD. I had flashbacks. I was a disaster. And he said, "Joanne, what took you so long?" Because he knew from when I was in boarding school that that was not a healthy situation to be in. So he made the necessary steps to um, allow me to voluntarily admit myself into Providence Continuing Care. And that's when my healing started to begin. That's when my life started. But the healing process was worse than the abuse.
Hmm.
because it was untangling this
Uh-huh.
web of of deceit and
Mm-hmm.
lies and misunderstanding.
Yeah. Joanne, let's take a little breath here. Um, and then we'll come back to some more questions. I, again, am Pastor Tom. This is the 24 Today podcast, and you can find out more about me at 24today.org. You can search my name, Tom Whitesel. Last name is Whitesel on Facebook. Tom Whitesel, and you can find lots of interviews and different things that I've done similar to this. My whole thing is just I want to encourage people, I want to help people in this 24 hours that God has given us to make the most of this day. And you can find me on Facebook as well if you would search 24 Today, Pastor Tom, and you'll find me. But I want you to go to my guest's website. It's Johanne Brennan is her name. Johanne, and last name is Brennan, and her website is thawyourfrozenfeetbook.com. Just like it sounds, thawyourfrozenfeetbook.com. Joanne, tell me a little bit about that site, maybe about your book and what you are doing as an advocate for women now.
For sure. I'd be happy to. So, what is on my site is the opportunity to view a short video and perhaps of what somebody may be going through, or they know somebody who might be being abused. They could be directed to that site. And there's a little bit of excerpt on the book, what things to pinpoint if you think you might be in an abusive relationship. So my book is not my story, and you will quickly learn this on my site. I speak about my story as a woman's advocate, and men for that matter, because there are also, I do not want to discount the fact that it's just a woman's subject. That is not the case. There are many men that have come forward for abuse as well. So my book is a 10-step guide as part of the what is relayed on my site about how to get out of an abusive relationship.
Okay. And people can find your book on Amazon.com as well, an ebook. But is the
Yeah.
best way to get your book on your own site, either way?
Well, there's an opt-in to put your name and email address, and I will send you the first free chapter,
Okay.
the first chapter for free. And then I'm on Amazon.ca and all over the world for the ebook as well. And as a women's advocate, or an advocate, I would like to say for abuse, people of abuse, is I speak on podcasts worldwide, and I
Uh-huh.
speak within the community. I'm heavily involved, as well as speak throughout the country.
And people can find you on LinkedIn. Just search Johanne Brennan. Also, Facebook. They can find you as well, Johanne Brennan, on Instagram under Thaw Your Feet. I'm sorry, Thaw Your Frozen Feet on Instagram. On Twitter as well, Johanne Brennan. And there are a few videos on YouTube that can be found, and this one, of course, will be found as well. Joanne, how did you ever trust again?
I learned how to set my what my limitations and boundaries are for myself, what I was willing to accept, and what I was willing to not accept. And learning to trust again is a very, very long process. I started to work on building my intuitive muscle and watching people's movements and behaviors and facial expressions and when I think they might be lying, and when I think they're somebody that I could potentially allow into my life. And all of that transpired over the 12 plus years of interpersonal therapy that I had. Um, and so it was not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I still work on it today. But everything is a process. And I started by working through finding out who I am. And once you know who you are as an individual and you know what your morals, values, and ethics are, they're easy to stand by,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you are honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then that process continues into a positive domino effect in what you want to build for your life and building trust around that life.
So, just in general, what will you not accept anymore?
I will not accept somebody disrespecting me. I will not accept somebody lying to me. Respect, honesty, and trust is the paramount for me in a relationship. And I will not accept somebody belittling me or devaluing who I think I am as an
Mm-hmm.
individual. I'm a very humble individual,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to, that quietness of my humbleness does not mean that I am weak in
Mm-hmm.
any way, shape,
Sure.
or form.
Sure. What is it like to be loved the way you should be?
It's amazing. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing to know who I am at my age, have gone through the extenuating circumstances that I have, and almost dying several times. Um, Having time to be alone because there are so many answers in silence, and then having somebody who is, I look at this individual in my life now, and he allows me to be who I'm meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
He supports me in who I feel my mission is to become. And that is I'm getting the chills. That is the most amazing feeling when you are building a life with somebody with a good, solid foundation where there are no cracks in that foundation, and communicating about what each of us wants. It is an elated feeling. It's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful.
And without having known you long, can I just say how proud I am of you
Thank you.
for coming from the absolute worst situations in life to where you're actually helping others and an advocate, and you didn't give up, and you continued on, and how proud God is of you as well
Thank
today
you.
for what you're doing. Did you feel a weird sense of twisted guilt over, like, I mean, is this part of what a woman goes through?
Yeah, I did. So here's where that guilt and twisted thought process went on, and my perception of it. Um, God loved my parents. They gave me an amazing life. They are quite a bit older than most my age, and I was taught once you're married for life, no matter what.
Yes.
And I had children, and even though mainly my mother knew what was happening, um, she felt like I belonged still where I was supposed to be with my husband, and I was hurting the children. And when I discerned and spent time alone figuring out what, and there's that process that I said about unraveling that whole web of deceit and lies and perceptions and misperceptions. I um, I realized that she was speaking from her experience and her perspective on what she thought was best for me and the children. and her perspective was not what my reality was. And so I did feel guilty because I felt like I was going to um, 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 make her unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
But I had been doing everything for everybody else and have myself at the bottom of the list, that if I had made that decision to stay, I could be dead. The children would have been in the worst possible situation because they ended up, there were two kidnap attempts. There were like they were being affected by corporal punishment. And I realized that that is not okay. That is so dysfunctional. And so I had this guilt of, if I do this, then I'm going to make my mom unhappy and I'm going to disappoint her. But that was not the case in the end, how things unraveled. But I did feel guilty. I felt
Mm-hmm.
guilty, like I was taking the kids away from their father. I felt like I felt horrible inside, and I didn't know how to work through that until I worked through it with the tools that the my team gave me at Providence.
And you need to put yourself, you need to think of yourself on behalf of your kids. You need to think of yourself first. Just like you buckle your seatbelt first in an airplane.
That's right. I was running on empty, and a vehicle doesn't move once it's out of gas. And I I completely was spent. I was finished. And I cannot provide for my children and be a good, healthy, wholesome mother
Mm-hmm.
for them if I didn't take care of myself. And I wasn't taking care of myself because I was providing for everybody else.
For the woman out there, or maybe the man that wonders if they're seeing signs of maybe my mate is being abusive and I'm just so used to it that I don't even think about it, what would you say are some signs or some things that you ought to really kind of try to step back or maybe talk to someone else to get some perspective?
Sure. Some of the signs, and I know it was for me and for many women and men that I speak to, is control, and a sense of where they feel that they have ownership over you, belittling you or manipulating,
Mm-hmm.
which can be very hard to decipher. Um, but control where checking the gas levels in the car, demanding that things be an absolute certain way no matter what, the cans in the cupboard, the your timeline, um, you know, obviously hitting. If anybody strikes you, that is just unacceptable.
Sure.
So that's a very clear sign. There's the emotional effects can be so much worse than the physical effects, and I cannot express that enough. That um, for example, when I was pregnant, that was supposed to be the most beautiful time of a woman's life if they're in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy relationship. I was told I was fat and ugly and I would not amount to anything.
Mm-hmm.
So those are signs that that is a very dysfunctional situation to be in. Um, and the list goes on, and I would encourage anybody to refer to my book for that,
Okay.
because I lay that out very clearly in my book.
Okay. And Joanne, we are going to head now to the sort of the end of this particular podcast. And as we do that, I'm going to ask you, what would you say to someone today that is in an abusive situation? So I'll ask you that at the end. But first, let me just again remind you, I'm Pastor Tom. You can find me on 24today.org. And my guest today, Johanne Brennan, you can find her at Thaw Your Frozen Feet thawyourfrozenfeetbook.com. That's thawyourfrozenfeetbook.com, and you can sign up for a free month. I'm sorry, not a free month, a free chapter of her book. If you just put your email address there on her site, you can find her on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Amazon, all over the place. How can people contact you? Can they contact you through your site, if personally, or if they have questions or
Yeah,
thoughts?
I would. In terms of my site, it's I would definitely receive their email. It would just um, I would encourage them to go to Facebook, my
Okay.
Facebook page at Thaw Your Frozen Feet,
Okay.
and message me, or as
Okay.
well as my email at how to thaw your frozen feet
Okay.
at zoho.com.
Okay. So that's how to thaw your frozen feet at Zoho, ZOHO.com. And someone interested in you coming and speaking, what types of places do you speak at, or what are you interested in there?
I am interested. I've done 20-minute speeches, and customarily I will do a keynote for 1 hour, 45 minutes to an
Okay.
hour. I speak at very small, intimate settings, as well
Okay.
as my upcoming one is going to be about 35,000 women. So, yep,
Good for you.
I'm available. It's about getting the word out.
Sure. And so as we draw to an end of this conversation, and hopefully we'll have another one in the future, but um, if a woman is being abused, what are her first steps of getting help?
I would, if there is preparation to be able to pack a bag and leave quietly during a time of a period when the abuser is not there, I would recommend that. In my case, I was not in that kind of a situation. I had to flee for my life. So call somebody that you absolutely feel you can trust. It could be your doctor, it could be a teacher that you may know, it could be a pastor or priest.
Hmm.
It can be the crisis line, and then they will be able to help forward you into the proper direction.
And what would you say, Joanne, now to someone who's listening to this very podcast, and they're in a situation that they're scared, they're being abused, and they're just not sure if they can have the courage to leave or even make it another day? What would you say?
There is always hope. There is always a way to get out. I am encouraging anybody that may be going through that type of situation or knows somebody that is, reach out to somebody, because you are worthy, you are valuable. Everybody has some sort of greatness in them.
Absolutely.
And I encourage you to reach out, because you do have a purpose on this earth.
Yes. Johanne, thank you so much for sharing your personal story with me and being on this podcast. And just a reminder for those of you that are listening, I always say this, that there's still time left in this 24-hour period to live life today. So Johanne, thank you very much. And I hope people will get your book, How to Thaw Your Frozen Feet, and we'll go to your website and just be able to get more and more information and get help from you. Thank you so much, Johanne.
Thank you.
And listeners, we will see you next time. Thank you. If this podcast has been helpful for you and you haven't already subscribed, just go to the subscribe button that you'll see on the page and subscribe. That way you'll make sure that you get everything that I put on the podcast the moment that it's available. And if it's helpful for you, it probably would be helpful for someone that you know as well. If you could send them a link or tell them about the podcast, and then also comment on the particular podcast, wherever you're at. Rate it, if you will, and that will help others to be able to see and hear about the podcast.